Thank you for coming. Basically I'm going to talk briefly about Agile and kind of how we've kind of tried to implement the Cogworks over the last couple of years really. After all things Agile, it's kind of a moving beast, kind of refining it as we go. I'll basically take you through kind of how we've implemented it. So it's not explicitly a Scrum teaching lesson session. Try and make it a bit collaborative, so if anyone has any questions or wants to know anything specifically, just let me know really. Firstly, how many people use Agile processes or try to, or are in the process of, so people kind of know what it is. Who doesn't kind of know what it is or has any experience of it? Okay, cool. Basically, traditionally, in a web project, and we've done quite a few over the years, there's a standard kind of set of things. So I'll go through a quick scenario of a standard web build that we functionally used to go through. So you get an RFQ, you create a proposal with an estimated cost in, some finger in the air cost that you think may or may not stick, depending on whether the client likes it or not. Put in some pretty Gantt charts that have some kind of estimated timelines in that you think may work. Hooray, you win the project, great. You start scoping. You then spend 1, 2, 3 weeks creating a big functional spec, lots of everything in it. You define everything as much as possible, get everything nailed down, and then obviously based on that functional spec, agree a price with the client because you think you know kind of what's going to happen. Again, agree the delivery date. Then you start wireframing, go through the design process, development, and then the client ogre brief creep starts to set in. Decide to change something. Some changes are small, so you think, oh, it's fine, we'll do it. It's only an hour change here. Another one comes in, or it's only another hour change. Another one comes in, 3-hour change, and by the time you've gone through that, you kind of feel you may have underestimated the actual size of the project initially when you did that massive 120-page scoping document, and now kind of not really worth the paper it was written on and the time you wasted doing it. But you fix the price and the delivery date, so kind of what happens. So you begin to cut corners, you rush. You then get to the UAT phase of the project. Client then realises, well, this isn't what I asked for. Why have you delivered this? You maybe did something right at the beginning. You've got it in this big document, but the client never reads it. Why is it going to go through 120 pages? It's boring. He just agrees with you, says yeah. So you start to panic. You realise you've got to refactor the whole site, redesign the whole site, amend something fundamental that you got wrong at the beginning. But again, you've agreed a fixed price, so who pays for that? The client starts to blame you, tells you to mend it, you panic even more, start to hack away. Quality goes out the window because you're just bashing through it just to get it out the door and get it delivered. Maybe you missed the delivery date, so your relationship goes kind of sour. Eventually you get the site live. But again, because you've rushed, maybe there's a few bits that you know you've omitted, but you're, oh, sorry, I'll do it after the delivery date, no one will notice. Client notices a massive bug in the site, you fix the bug as a gesture of goodwill, but for no charge. Again, you've lost money as a development house. All the trust has gone from the relationship. Unhappy client, start chancing it even more. Obviously, that's quite an extreme scenario, not one that happens every time, but you can see how projects like that can kind of go wrong in the structure if you agree everything up front, and that's kind of where the hassle sets in really. So as a development house, you've basically lost money. Whether you've made profit on the job is kind of you need to figure out, but whether you've lost money, the relationship is very difficult to mend. You've woken up the dog, you've become disheartened, you used to have fun, then you turned into a grumpy, horrible developer or a development house, and you need to turn to the beer to help. But there is another way. Happy grown-up conversations. To us, a client and an agency is a partnership basically. So you need to work together. You need to understand what they want, what you can deliver for a reasonable amount of money, or for the budget that they have, or for a timeline that they have. So basically, I'll just go through kind of the agile versus waterfall. Now, waterfall is kind of the traditional. It's called a defined process. So there's a defined definition of a scoping phase. The scenario I've just talked through is scoping, design, development, testing, launch, hell. Agile is kind of more empirical, so it's better for situations where you don't know the final outcome. And the problem with web projects is, as hopefully we're all aware, you know what you think, or the client thinks they know what they want, but what can actually be delivered for that amount of money or for their expectations is a changing, movable beast. So the empirical agile process means there's more transparency, there's more inspection, and then adaptation of what you talk to the client. So from our perspective, it's all about communication. Communication is key, really. So the difference between the project variables in a waterfall project, which is a traditional project, you have fixed features, because you've agreed up front this functional specification. You know they want all of this stuff. There's a fixed timeline because they want it by the week next Tuesday, and there's a fixed cost. So the only kind of variable in there is quality. I've got one behind that. Nice Apple animation. So that's the problem. Because you fixed everything else, you fixed the cost, fixed time, fixed the features, because you know you've got to deliver all this and you've agreed to it. The only thing you can reduce is the quality, because you need to bash it out, you cut corners, and that's where problems happen. You stop the QA process, or you don't test things as much, you don't test things in every browser. The client realizes that, and then you've got to go back and bug fix it all. The agile version, time is kind of variable, so is the cost. The quality is fixed. Sorry, time and cost are fixed, and quality is fixed. The only other variable therefore is features. So in a grown-up conversation, the client goes, I've got X amount of money, I need it by a week next Tuesday. We know we need to be high quality because that's what we want to deliver. So a grown-up conversation, we cannot deliver all of these things that you want by that date for that amount of money. So the main idea at that point is to prioritise and work with the client as closely as possible to figure out what they actually want, what is going to be the minimum amount of those feature set to get the site live that will make them happy by that date for that cost base. One quite good example is the original iPhone that came out. It was launched in January 2007, and I'm sure you're all aware when they launched it, there was a bunch of missing features. It wasn't copy and paste, there wasn't any MMS in there, they didn't have any apps, there wasn't an app store. But their main priority was getting it out as quickly as possible. And they had a date in mind that they wanted to get it out. They knew they wanted to be as high quality as possible with the new touch base and the new features that they had. So the only thing that was variable were the features. So they dropped the features, got the product out, hit the market. It was a massive success, and then iterated. And the next versions of the iOS system had copy and paste, had all the features that you'd expect in the phone. So it's kind of a good example of reducing the feature set, get out the minimum that you need to hit the market, and then prioritising the most important features first. So on that basis, it's kind of a client education, really, and it's obviously tricky, and we found it tricky to get across. But the point of the agile relationship is as all sensible relationships, there needs to be involvement from both sides constantly. And the client needs to understand that they need to have a person who is there when you ask them to test something. They don't disappear for 3 months, and then you come back and deliver something that is wrong because you haven't talked to them, they haven't talked to you, they haven't been receptive, they've not tested what you've asked them to. And that, again, that only comes from communication. And they need to understand that the quality is key. If time and budget are fixed, then there is only a certain amount of features or of the feature set that they require that you can actually deliver. So an important thing for a client to understand, I use this as a scenario for a pitch or a meeting that we had recently. I'll come to kind of the Scrum user story type scenario shortly, but the client needs to kind of understand there's always an easy way of doing something and always a complex way of doing something. And every piece of functionality has the same thing. So for this client that I spoke to a couple of months ago, just an example of how it works. They wanted a donation tool on the front of the website, so an easy way of doing that is to have an Umbraco form with a text box. You type a number in, you hit publish, updates animation on the site. In Umbraco world, that's half a day, a day's worth of work, 2 days tops with a bit of design. Complex, they've got their own internal CRM system with call center that links into that, so they've got donations coming in from all angles into that system. Web services to get all of that data out, writing the web application layer in Umbraco, doing the user interface, 2, 3, 4 weeks worth of work with testing. Easy way, hard way. Easy way, you can pay someone half an hour, 5 minutes to work out someone's day just to type that number in after collating all the information. And then it's just a conversation. You've got X amount of money, you've just blown 75% of that on this complex route here. Do you really need it? And then at that point it's a cost analysis, cost benefit analysis. Do you actually need that massive piece of complexity to just update this animation? Is it going to get you any business value? Is it going to get you any more donations into your site by spending all of that extra money when you can do it in a day and then spend the other 75% doing lots of other nice things that will add value to that site? There are various different types of agile. I'm not going to go through them all, but XP, Kanban, lean software development, all different ways of different reasons for doing it. We kind of chose the Scrum route. The main manifesto for Agile: individuals' interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. So the point of Agile is you don't do that massive document at the beginning. You create a list of a to-do list fundamentally. It's a list of user stories that are prioritised, the most important ones at the top, least important down the bottom. So working software, basically just start developing. Once you've agreed something, the best way of doing it is to start. There's no point talking about it and documenting it for 3 weeks before. You could have built half the site by the time you've written the functional specification and wasted all that time and money. Customer collaboration, which I've kind of already spoke about. And responding to change. It's fine to change your mind. Changing your mind is fine, it's good. It means things iterate, things improve. But it's how you respond to that change that's the important factor. In a waterfall process, because you've agreed the functional specification up front and that is fixed and that's what you've signed, to change stuff is more complicated. It's doable, but it's more complicated. The point of the agile way is to iterate, to make things better, to improve. So Scrum, cheesy photo, get the point across. Why do we choose Scrum-ish? The way we implemented it, we have quite a lot of the Scrum techniques in what we do, but we've also included a bit of XP because we have continuous integration and incremental deployment. So it's called extreme programming, but it gives a more structured development process. But the Scrum process itself has all the team management tools, so things like stand-up meetings, the Scrums themselves, sprints. So what we've kind of done, and every company I'm sure is the same, has their own form of it. It's just the way you adapt stuff. There is no, obviously the different types of agile, but it's what fits your organisation, your team you already have, that's going to make people work better. So, and again, as I said at the beginning, agile is a constantly evolving process. It doesn't have to sit still. You don't just do, right, we are now agile and walk away. You constantly review, you find bits that didn't work in the last project, refine them, make it better in the next project. So again, the agile process is constantly iterating through. So it's been around since 1986, created by a couple of Japanese fellows. I won't try and pronounce their name. As I said, it's an iterative and incremental process. Why it's called Scrum is the team tries to go the distance as a unit, passing the ball back and forth. So passing the ball back and forth. It is the communication. Is this done? No, it's not. Okay, well, we'll make it better this time. So again, it's constantly iterating. And it focuses on things very difficult to plan ahead, i.e. web projects. New technologies come in, you could be halfway through a project and a new social networking system comes along, therefore you need to iterate. You can't plan every finite detail of every web project forever. The Scrum roles, three main areas. The product owner is the stakeholder. So you kind of have to get away from the project manager role in a kind of traditional waterfall process. The product owner is the person he's the stakeholder, usually technically at the client. It can be the person who talks to the client from our perspective, so a producer or an account manager type role. And the product owner is really important because they're accountable for ensuring that the team delivers the value, and he's the person who makes the decisions, gets the communication from the client to make sure that whether it's a simple fix or a complex fix, and makes the client understand the issues we're going down the complex route. And the product owner writes the user stories, prioritises them, adds them to the product backlog, which we'll go through in a minute. Every team should have at least one producer, product owner, because they are the person that's key. Obviously, then you've got the development team, which are 2 or more developers or team members. They don't necessarily have to be developers. The Scrum team can be made up of the skills that are needed for that particular user story. So you may have a bit of UX, you may have a bit of back-end development, you may have a bit of design, you may have a bit of business analysis going on, so that make up all the component parts to make that particular user story happen. And then a Scrum Master, who is not a project manager. He's kind of in charge of removing things that stop the team delivering what they need to do in a particular sprint. They're a kind of enforcer of the rules, so they make sure that you do have the daily stand-up meeting, you are communicating, you are making sure you're going through the backlog list and then making decisions. They're kind of the master of the process. A product backlog, a sprint backlog, and burn down charts. I won't go into burn down charts too much, but the product backlog and the sprint backlog are kind of really important. The product backlog is basically the to-do list for the whole project. So you would sit down with the client, work out the user stories, and a user story is a non-technical description of a piece of functionality. So as a user, I'd like to see a list of products in a category order so I can find my products easily. As kind of an example, it's a placeholder for a conversation. So at that point, you can go, right, well, what list of products do you need to see with the client? How do you want them ordered by date order? What do you want in there? I need a thumbnail and the price. You know, it's a communication piece and a conversation piece. The sprint backlog itself is kind of the list of user stories you have for the particular sprint you're in at the time. And what we kind of do, so the user stories, so they're to foster discussions really, so to get information out of the client. There's kind of 2 types of user stories. There's the user stories, which is a piece of functionality, or it could be a task. So you wouldn't necessarily do a user story for the client needs to be trained or need to write a manual specifically. So the way we work with user stories, when we're doing sprint planning, we do sprint planning on a Friday for the next week. So we break down user stories into component parts really. So for instance, this one, as a website visitor, I would like to view a list of products on the home page so I can easily see what's recently been added. And as I said before, there's a bit of UX there because you need to design the panel. There's a bit of front-end development because you need to build the HTML. There's a bit of macro building to pull out the products. So there's a selection of skills. But what that does, it allows you to plan for the next week, and you know what resources you need for all those pieces. So it makes things easier to plan going forward. One thing that's really important with user stories is acceptance criteria. How do you know that you've done the user story? How do you know that it's been completed to the client's satisfaction? So acceptance criteria for that story, for instance, would be must show the latest 5 products, must be ordered by date added, must have a thumbnail and a price. Now that's kind of gives you a test scenario at the end when you define it as done. Done is quite an important factor, which I'll kind of touch on shortly, to test. So when you finish that user story, how do you know it's done? Well, it's met all of these criteria. The client can see it, you've demoed it to them, they've signed it off, and hopefully everyone's happy. If there's a change in that, and you haven't met it, obviously you haven't done the acceptance criteria, then it isn't finished, so therefore you need to fix it. If the client then goes, oh, but it doesn't it's not pink and it hasn't got 15 products in there, and you go, well, you didn't ask for that, we specified the acceptance criteria, that would potentially be another user story which you put onto the backlog list. You prioritise how important is this change, is it going to be business critical? Yes, you'll go to the top of the list, if not, you'll go down the bottom because there's other things that are more important ahead of it. And that's kind of how we work the project. We also have project constraints, which are kind of generic. We have generic ones, but also ones specifically for the specific project. So we have so generic ones we have are not broken in i7 and i8, full support for IE9, the latest browsers, content has been spell checked, backend has been spell checked, and obviously if you had specific ones for it was needed to be a responsive site, therefore your other constraints would be you must work on a BlackBerry, which version of BlackBerry, you must work on an iPhone and an iPad, for instance, so you have a set of constraints for each project. As I mentioned before, prioritisation is kind of key, and you must work with the client to prioritise them because they're, at the end of the day, it's their money. They know the project, they have the project and want to get something at the end of it, so therefore for that amount of money, which things are most important? Which things are most high priority, and are they really high priority? And again, the communication and the product owner must know the business vision so he can make the decision. So whether the marketing director thinks it's a very high priority because he loves that piece of social networking functionality that another department doesn't, is that actually a high priority, or is it just because the marketing manager wants his profile up on Twitter, sort of thing? So it's kind of those discussions that you need to have. And we get to this thing called MMS, which is minimal marketable subset, which is basically what do you need to get out of the door to make this project a success? What's the minimum you need to do? And that obviously based on the priority, so all the ones that we need to do, all of these things need to be at the top of the list. Everything under that is kind of, well, if we get time, we'd love to do them. All the ones down the bottom, we don't really need them, we're not going to have any impact at all for them, it's just icing on the cake. It's kind of how we work it. I mean, it's difficult, as we all know, and I'm sure you're aware, clients haven't got endless pockets. We wish they would have, but they haven't. So in a sensible world, and to kind of get by the client's understanding that you have, so you're doing this agile process and you're always going to iterate forever and I've got to spend all of my money and I'll never stop. And that is a problem that we've kind of faced, or I've faced in meetings. But it doesn't have to necessarily be like that if you communicate with the client properly at the beginning, using the difficult way, the easy way. It's your money. We don't really care how you spend it. If you want to blow it all on one particular piece of functionality, that's kind of your prerogative. But you need to have a conversation with them and have, as I said, a grown-up conversation. Go, if you want to blow 90% of your budget on that, that's fine. But you're going to lose all of these other 30 pieces of bits that you wanted off the bottom of the list. So is it really that key? Do you really want it? Is it really that high priority? So kind of what we started to do in a project when you get the initial proposal is kind of sit down with the team. And again, involving the team that we have our own office is very important because sharing knowledge is, again, kind of key. A developer may have done something already that another developer doesn't know about. So if I go away and sit in a corner and come up with a cost, 3 of our developers may have already done something that I don't know about. It could only take us 10 minutes to do it as opposed to 3 weeks I think we have. So it's that sitting down at the beginning when costing a project, coming up with a kind of a list of user stories that we think would fit that project from the brief that we've been given. And then we do t-shirt sizing, and it's a really rough way, but surprisingly quite accurate way of just estimating those stories, and we use small, medium, large. What we do, we kind of pick out the ones. So, for instance, if it was a news section, they needed a news section on the website. There's kind of only there's a certain amount of things you can do. You need some data folders, you need some articles, you need to list them out. There's things like that. So the kind of the epic, they're called epics because they're quite big user stories. But you can kind of say, well, that's a medium task. A news section is quite simple in Umbraco. That's a medium. Massive CRM integration with web services. That's obviously a large. Panel on the home page. That's a small. So picking a range of medium as your the one that you would start with, because different projects again have different. A medium on one project may be different to a medium on another project. If you've got some big data integration service, there may be different relative values for a small, medium, and large. And decide how many mediums you can actually do in a week. So, for instance, you could maybe do 3 mediums in a week. So you could build a news section, and 2 other sections of mediums. You could maybe think, well, yeah, we could do that in a week. You could maybe do 1 large in a week if it's some big CRM integration, or you could do 4 or 5 smalls. So it's kind of just taking an estimate on that. And then figure out where the minimum marketable set is. You know roughly from the brief that you've received, they've said, we need all of these bits, this is what this project entails. We've got these other bits here that we'd be good if Umbraco did, but we understand there may be some bespoke development involved there. And these bits that, again, phase 3, for instance, sometimes you get briefs that have different phases in. And then we add an additional 40% one. So what we kind of tend to do, we've got the user stories there in a big column. We know that that MMS level there is what they need to launch. So it's kind of a proof diagram. And working out the small, medium, and larges, we figured out that to get to that MMS level, we kind of need 4.5 sprints worth. We kind of do 1-week sprints because none of our projects are that big, so we have generally 1-week sprints. You could have 2-week sprints if it was a large project. And then we pick another 40% of the stories underneath. And we know to do that and the extra 40% is kind of going to be 6 sprints worth. And then we add another one just for hardening, for deployment and things like that. So we know basically to do that MMS level, we set it to be 7 weeks basically, because that gives us an extra 40%. So we know that we 100% categorically can get everything that we've said above the first red line in that timescale. But with the conversation that we have with the client, we can go, if all of those above the first line are really simple, and we do it in 2 weeks, for instance, we know that we can take some things off of that extra 40%, and that'll make the client very happy. Obviously, we only say we're going to do the first one, and then that gives us, so if they suddenly throw some massive complexity into the first step, we've got 40% buffer that's kind of protected us and protected the client. They know, roughly what we said we were going to deliver. The definition of done, as I mentioned before, is quite important. Everyone must understand what done means. Done doesn't mean, oh, it's finished, but I've still got to deploy it. That's not done. So you need to define what this definition of done is. So for us, for instance, ours are, when we get a user story, we break it down into its component parts. So there'll be a bit of design, a bit of UX, a bit of HTML. All those separate tasks must be done for the user story to be done. The product owner agrees it meets the acceptance criteria that we set for the user story. The client agrees it meets those acceptance criteria. It has been deployed somewhere other than the developer's laptop. Obviously, you stick it via TeamCity onto a server and IIS6 is on there, not IIS whatever, and that's not done. It's not working. It's not physically on a server where you can actually see it. And it passes all the tests, so if you did have TDD tests set up or anything like that, Selenium, blah blah blah, all those must be passed for it to be done as well. As I mentioned before, the Scrum team, you need to have all the skills that make up, but again, that allows you to plan much better. So what we do at the Cogworks, we found over the last 6 months though it's worked really well, because we're quite a small team anyway. And traditionally, you would have a Scrum team for every project. So you would have a set of developers on the side. But because we're quite a small team, none of our projects are that big. We kind of decided to try it, and it's worked really well. It's just we are all a Scrum team. Our company is one Scrum team. We have one backlog that every project feeds into, and we have, as I said, the Friday meeting to decide on the priority of all the user stories across all the projects that we know are happening. So we have 3 or 4 projects running at the same time, and they're all in a big list. We sit down, we prioritise them. We know that 2 of the projects that have got deliverable dates over the next couple of weeks. We know that the deliverable dates for the other projects, so we move obviously the stories for the next week to the top of the list, and then we obviously allocate those to the developers and work with the developers to actually estimate them at that point. So if they need a week to do them, then we do that on a Friday, and that just gives a lot better visibility. We found it's made us a lot better, a lot more efficient, because we know what's coming up. The developers know. We have the traditional post-it notes all over the wall, which the developers can see, but we also use fog bugs, which is really, really good for adding the user stories to and assigning the user stories to the developers. So in the sprint planning, as I mentioned, we review the backlog, so we re-estimate and reorder the stories so we know which one's coming up for the next week. And as I said before, shared estimation as a company, because someone may have done something already that would make that particular piece of functionality better. We've already got a package that we've forgotten about and we've used for Umbraco before. It's a simple install, as opposed to one team sat over here not talking to the other team. They go and spend 3 weeks developing something which we've had before, and someone goes, "Oh, I've already got that." And it's kind of, if you have the team effort, and you do things a lot quicker. One other thing which is very important is the retrospective, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning. It's a continuing process, and it's never kind of finished, because you always find things that are better, new tools that come out that will help you. So at the end of every sprint or project or both, how did it go? We did the same yesterday with Tim, who's in the room today, at the hackathon. We kind of, we'll talk about it in a bit in the main room, but it worked really well. It was Pico Scrum, Pico sprints. We had hour sprints, basically, time-boxed sprints where the developers in the room picked some of the bugs that were in the Umbraco bug list, and gave them an hour, basically. At the end of every hour, just asked, how did that go? Did it work? What's blocking you? What went well? Review, and then the next one. And the same could be to an hour, the same could be a week, the same could be a whole project. But again, it's just constantly reviewing, constantly looking, how well did we do? Is there anything we can do to change it to make it better? So yeah, that's kind of, I've explained kind of bits of that already. The thing that we're kind of working on is UX. This is kind of an open discussion as well, really. If you are doing it, UX is always the tricky thing, because clients like pretty pictures. They like to see what they're going to get. They like to go, what am I going to get at the end of this? And if you're going down the agile route, oh well, it's all nebulous and we'll eventually get there, but we don't know how we're going to get there. And clients obviously don't like that, because they need to go to the board of directors and go, for this £20,000, we're going to get this beautiful website, and then they need to sign a budget. And UX is obviously the tricky thing there. Kind of what we have tried, and it kind of works, is because they like to see the pictures, you can come up with a design concept, you can kind of design the padding around, so the head, the footer, sub-navigation. But obviously the thing that relates to the user stories is the bit in the middle, the content area. It's worked quite well with some clients, is giving the initial concept, as your website will look something like this, it's going to have these colours and these kind of areas, the logo is going to be here, phone number at the top. But what's actually in this panel, we kind of design as we get to that user story, and we kind of design the sprint before, so we can do the wireframes before, do the design, show those, get them kind of theoretically signed off, with the understanding that when we actually do the development, things may change. That button may not work there because CSS has thrown some bizarre error. So again, it's having that conversation and testing. So during the sprint, it's time to test. At the end of every week, we do a demo of everything that we've done to the client for the previous week. But also, if there's a question that we have, just phone the client up. Can we just show you something? Is the editor working the way you want it to work? Can you add a blog article easily? Is this what you expected? So you don't get to the end of the sprint or the project and find out that you've done it wrong. They're involved in it. They need to be there. They need to be visible. They need to have somebody who can actually work with you to go, no, that's nearly right, but we need to add an image there. Or actually, I've forgotten we need to apply 3 images on that page because we've got a company document that's already gone. So that's kind of working for us. I mean, does anybody else do any UX agile like that? Anybody have any success with doing it other ways, or anyone else tried it? Because it's kind of working for us, but
we've tried a fairly similar and found much the same thing. There's a certain amount you need to do up front before you go into an agile process. The client just needs something tangible.
I know it's difficult because they do visual. People are very visual. People like to see pretty pictures. They like to see what they're going to get. So wireframes don't always give that, and then sometimes you're locked into the wireframe. So if you do them all up front, it's kind of tricky. But it's okay. It's an evolving process, so it's kind of we're working and trying different ways. But the demo is very important, and we found that with a traditional project, obviously you just end up with this massive UAT phase at the end. The key with agile development is you QA as you go along. At the end of every sprint, if it's a week or 2 weeks, you are QAing, you show it to the client. They are signing it off as done. And if they sign it off and then they decide to change their minds 3 weeks later, we go, well, you've already signed it off. That's actually a change request in the old world or a new user story. How important is that? Because you've only got this amount of budget left. Is it really important, or can we drop it off and do it when you have more budget available because we've still got these 3 high priority user stories to do? And again, it's just a constant conversation with the client.
That's not really a UX question, but when you're listing user stories, you prioritise those by how kind of quote important unquote they are. Do you have any ways of tracking dependencies between stories? Because like you might have to do a large before you can do that medium, because that's the integration piece before you can do the front end.
There's no, I don't know, Tim. Answer that one.
Well, dependencies. I mean, if you're doing user stories in the right way, user story is like a slice of cake. So you've got icing, or you've got a sponge, and you've got cream in the middle. And the icing on the top is the icing on the top is your design, and your sponge is your development, and your cream in the middle is something else. But effectively, you slice through the cake, and you choose a piece that you can get done in the amount of time that you have. And so effectively, they shouldn't strictly be dependent on each other. They should be self-contained units, and dependencies should be minimised at all possibilities, really. Because if you're getting dependencies, it means you're probably cutting your cake the wrong way, and you're probably doing things in the old way, doing kind of a bit of development and a bit of UX and a bit of.
But I'm thinking, for example, specifically, there might be you might have to do some back-end integration with some third-party service before you can do the front end. Like the whole front end of the website might tie into
then that's pure. Then that's less of a dependency and pure prioritisation. In that, you know,
you just
it's just more important because you have to have that. And that could still be a user story. You don't have to write user stories from the perspective of a customer persona. You can still do. So if 2 systems are interacting with each other, then the user story might be written from the perspective of 2 systems talking to each other. So as a CRM system, I want to be able to tell the website that something has changed. And in that way you can sort of work on those things first, and as long as they're prioritised first, then that's not a dependency. And it is a dependency in that you can't have the front end, but you could still, if you're developing in a sufficiently isolated way, you could still develop the front end macro just with stubs to talk to the web service when it arrives. So you don't necessarily you just need to try and avoid dependency.
How do you judge then how granular you make your user stories? Because you could go.
Not very granular.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a bit of a Goldilocks question. That one is they're just right. You know, the porridge is not too hot or not too cold. My food analogy is terrible. Anyway, yeah, so I'm obsessed with food, right? So they need to be just right, and that will kind of depend on your organisation and how you want to do things, and it's. You just sort of need to get them just right for you. You'll know when they're right, and you'll probably, because it's an adaptive process, you'll probably do it a few times and go, actually they were a bit granular, or go, actually they were really big and we got into real problems, we never got anything done in the sprint because they were too big.
And it's quite, we found you learn, but when you're making them too granular, It may be that you need a bigger story with some more acceptance criteria associated with
I think what I found is that there's sometimes a disparity between what we think is a user story and what our client thinks is a user story, because they can get really caught up in the granularity of it and they want to see lots of different things.
Yeah, I mean that's when you're doing a user story workshop with your client, it helps if you can guide them on that, and if they're coming up with quite granular user stories, you can normally sort of guide them to go, we can probably combine this into one user story and put some acceptance criteria around it.
The thing with Umbraco as well is it's the decision of whether you make the user story for the editor and a user story for the front end person, or you make one user story and as the acceptance criteria you have editor must be able to add news article, editor must be able to add 3 images, therefore the website user must be able to see 3 images. So that's the kind of acceptance criteria of we need a news article section. You know what I mean? So
do you find yourself writing user stories that seem ridiculously obvious, or acceptance criteria that seem ridiculously obvious, just in order to get the structure of the user story right?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with writing stuff that's obvious, because you might think it's obvious, but maybe it's not obvious to a client or to a developer or whoever's reading the user story. So there's nothing wrong with writing simple things down.
Like, as a website visitor, I want to see news articles so that I can read the news or something. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? I think you end up writing stuff that sounds,
I mean, that's as long as the problem with that one is maybe the value, which is so that I can whatever it is. That's where you need to pick the sort of the right thing. Really, if you're not kind of defining the value of the story, maybe the story doesn't have that much value, or you don't understand the value, or the client doesn't understand the value, and that's a sort of a warning sign that the client's maybe not engaged properly with the process. If they're just going, oh yeah, that will do.
Fine.
Sorry. The other thing is that you mentioned about the client who wants to give it to their head of company who wants to sign it off. We have clients like that right now because we're looking to go agile. We know for a fact they won't go agile. How do you not do that anymore, or how do you manage that in your company if you're having to work agile and non-agile in terms of how you're structuring your resource?
It's a tricky one, really, because we're kind of evolving at the minute into a process of, if it's a new client and they want to fix the price that strictly, you need to ask the question of whether you want to work with that client. In the first place, you're going to get shafted because of that fixed price. And that's kind of only decision that you could make as a company, whether it's a high value client or you think you'll get more work out of it. Running the both together is it's just a transition. You kind of just have to go with it until you get to the point where you actually can go. It's kind of one of those, I think we learn from it. You either have to do it or don't do it. Doing it half-assed is kind of maybe slightly more damaging than just going full into it, because you've got some developers who don't really understand the process. Some are doing it one way. You're getting user stories mixed up all over the place. No one understands what the sprint is and things like that. And that's kind of it's difficult, but I think you kind of just have to right. We are now doing it from next week. This is the way we're working, and then we'll just iterate as we go and hopefully do it quickly.
Right.
Oh yeah.
How do you get to a place with prospective clients where you can have real conversations that you were talking about earlier? Because you're essentially asking them to move from a situation where they don't have any risk and you have the risk, to them sharing the risk.
That's the grown-up conversation I have in the sales meeting. I think I've just been stating it.
Yeah, if you're in a sales meeting and you say, okay, you can't have everything you want. If you do have everything you want, it'll be shit, or quality not shit.
Yeah.
They're likely to say, okay, we'll get someone else to do it who can make these promises, which they can
people pitch against you saying, can do that.
How do you?
So
how do you have those conversations?
You wait for them to come back to you in 6 weeks' time when they've done it wrong and they've done it in the shit. Basically, that's what the last 4 or 5 projects clients we've had clients.
So you're basically saying, if you don't like it, then just go find someone else.
Essentially. Obviously, without taking money out of your own pocket, we've done, stupid. We've been going for 6 years. The first 3 years, it's kind of the talking about last night actually. The agency life cycle. The first 2 or 3 years, you'll do anything just to get some clients on your books, and then you kind of grow up a bit, and then you go actually working like a dog for 500 quid. It's not really going to,
Some clients understand process, right? So if they get process and they want to work with a company that's got a process in place, then they can run with it. That's one of the key selling points.
Definitely, and if you can, it's easy to sell to them because you kind of just have the conversation. You're trying to nail us down to this price, we're going to whack 30% on the price of it because you're trying to nail us down. We're going to get all the risk. Therefore, our costs are going to go up by 30 or 40% to pay for you to pay for this project to cover our 40% risk. If you want to work nice, and it's almost time and labour, but it's kind of a better way of putting it. But
some people would rather pay the money.
Yeah.
And you have all the risk.
You might
Yeah.
work with.
Well, you might want to work with it. But I mean, if they're trying to speed you down that far, then do you want to have, is that a happy relationship? I prefer to have happy relationships, therefore it's a collaborative process and just hopefully.
Can I ask how you said you're working on sort of 3 or 4 projects at any one time?
Yeah.
How do you communicate the sort of end of sprint on Friday from the news scope to sprint?
Well, we have kind of I think it's now a time box planning meeting, don't we? I think so.
Yeah, but that's a planning meeting for you guys.
Yeah.
But how do you communicate, digital stories to the client? Is it just a case of?
It's just a demonstration, really. So either a screen share or in the offices. Screen share is easy. It's just a couple of user stories, and we're just doing it over Skype or something. We do kind of the demos, hopefully Friday morning if the client's available, which we usually are, and then we do the planning later on. So we've kind of hopefully done all the user stories, demoed them to them. We go to the backlog list in the afternoon. We know what's been done, tick them off, decide what's going to be for the next week. But obviously, use FaceTime and things. Google Docs is very good for user stories, and Google Spreadsheets because obviously you can work with the client, prioritise them with the client. They can see it all changing. There's a central story for Google Spreadsheets. It's quite useful to use that a lot.
Yeah, hi. How did moving to Agile affect your Umbraco setup with your developers? Did that change a lot? How they actually developed?
I don't think so.
No, I mean we were already doing. You mentioned a little bit about the sort of XP practices that we have. We were already doing quite a lot of that already, so it didn't particularly change how we did it. One of the things that is changing, unfortunately, the talk's in the other room at the moment, is actually doing the automation one, because obviously what we try and do is automate as much as possible, so we can be as responsive to change as possible. And part of that is being able to be fully automated and have automated tests and things like that. And we had some automated testing already, but we're now just doing that more. There's more of everything.
And having multiple developers working on the same project.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is useful if you use decent tools. Everyone uses Mercurial or Team City, you all work locally and share repositories. Even we work with other agencies who have front-end resource, and we do the Umbraco side of it, they have a front-end resource doing templates. We're all using Bitbucket as an external repository, we all link into that, but we own the build service, so our Bitbucket repositories use Team City to build out to our development box, client tests on that area, they can see it, so it's kind of a collaborative process, or we use our own internal Kiln repository, just depends on what the client fits really. We do kind of pure consultancy, where companies have their own .NET teams, front-end resource, we kind of help them best practice and train them a bit, or if they've only got front-end resource, we do the Umbraco bit of it and use their front-end resource, or we do kind of the whole lot, so we kind of set up to handle all the scenarios really.
Going back to your user experience point, you said that there's a certain amount of work that the client expects up front, which, because you've got to get the confidence before you can do that agile process. I was also thinking that responsive design has a sort of similar issues. So do you find if you've got the two together that helps each other or it hinders? How does it work if you're trying to do an agile project with responsive design and communicate that to the client?
I don't know if we're starting to do those now, I suppose. We're thinking of doing mobile first because most people are mobile first these days, and there's a lot more emphasis on iPad, iPhone views now and then. Obviously, if you know it works at a certain screen level, but it's difficult because not every client wants responsive because of the time and effort that you need to test. Is going back to the old browser war days. You've got to test it on an iPhone, an iPad, a BlackBerry. We had a project recently where it worked beautifully on everything. The client was like, it doesn't work. Well, why? It works. Now I've got on BlackBerry, it doesn't work. It does work here. It was the oldest BlackBerry known to man because we'd forgotten to specify the types of device. So responsive design is kind of a whole other animal. You go back to the old IT. No, I definitely do it, but again, we're evolving that process. We've done 3 or 4 responsive sites so far, but it's again, it's kind of new. Not every client wants it because they don't want to be all tested. Or we put a framework in, so we would use the actual framework bootstrap already, but don't do the responsive stuff. So again, prioritising, is it a priority to have it responsive? No, but we'll put the framework in now, so when you do want it, it'll be an easier process. 6 months down the line when they do want it and have got budget to pay for it. So. Okay, one more, because I think I'll get told just for running and
how do you handle user stories not being completed by the end of the sprint? You just put backlog into the backlog and everything goes to the backlog.
We beat people's ends.
It happens sometimes. How do you manage it?
yeah. Tim, I'll start.
Yeah, user stories that aren't complete go back onto the backlog, re-estimated, and go back into the next sprint.
We try and put our time to complete time on.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, and that's something that will come up in the retrospective. Hopefully, it shouldn't happen that often, but if it's happening all the time, it's normally there's a problem, and so it's a signal that we need to sort something
out. Are underestimating, therefore you need to review why you're. We've reduced the focus factor. We used to have it 7 hours a day because that's what we thought, but then we realised obviously you don't actually work for 7 hours a day. You have to do a bit of research, you have to do a bit of Googling, therefore you may be only doing 5 hours a day actually pure development. So reducing the focus factor, even though we're reducing the amount of hours that so if we charge X amount a day, but we've actually reduced it to 5 hours a day, which has given us 2 hours excess. So it's actually made our estimation a lot better and actually made us a lot more efficient because we're actually leaving time for the support requests that come in that you've not thought about and other emergency things through the week that take developers' minds off of actually the bit that they're supposed to be on. So it just kind of frees up space a bit and you don't take on too much because your focus factor is less. Yeah, I hope that was interesting anyway.